Greetings. My name is Augustine S. Samalu from Liberia, and today I'm pleased to join a team of debaters where I'm presenting or debating on the topic: should African countries develop their own genomic sequencing infrastructure or rely on international collaborations for affordability and expertise? We, my team and I, we actually on the affirmative side, stating African countries should develop their own genomic sequencing infrastructure and not rely on international collaborations for affordability and expertise. Next. For quick introduction, for scientific independence, moral leadership, and fair access to innovation, Africa must build its own genomic sequencing infrastructure. Long-term dependency limits local governance, even when international collaboration provides knowledge and financial support. Advocacy for policies may ensure that Genomic meets Africa's unique agriculture and health requirements, mobilizes fundings, and of course, direct ethical framework. Next. Access and policy can be transformed by successful collaboration, let us be clear, between researchers, policymakers, and campaigners, as is demonstrated by the worldwide HIV and AIDS advocacy movements. Well, the continent will maintain its position as a pioneer in ethical and inclusive genomic research if African-led genomic infrastructure is strengthened through persistent policy involvements. And that's what we're moving for today. Next. For our opening statement, let us have a clue on what a genomic is. According to the Oxford Dictionary, a genome is actually known to be a complete set of genes. And whenever we talk about genes, we are referring to information inside cells that can control what a living thing will be. Well, the CDC in just in a year 2024 presented genomic sequencing as the process of determining the order of bases. And these bases could be adenine, guanine, ox, and cytosine. They can be for short ATGC. Well, our argument is based on the notion that our health security, scientific communities, and health sustainability depend on local genomic infrastructure. I want us to understand that this should serve as a reminder that relying on international aid for screening samples from Africa on another continent delays disease response and can hinder innovation within our own continent, Africa. Next. Today, we please to present on 4 cardinal constructive arguments, or on 4 points. One of those points has to do with health security and rapid response. Now, modern health surveillance relies on genomic sequencing as its foundation. If we know that, we can also get it from this perspective that states during the just ended COVID-19 outbreak and the Ebola that runs from 2014 to 2016, which of course Liberia was affected, my country, samples from Africa were shipped abroad for analysis, or they were poorly analyzed locally based on the experience of the doctor or those health workers. And these caused weeks or even months of delay in identifying those new strains or variants. If Africa builds its own genomic infrastructure, laboratories across the continent can detect, track, and of course contain outbreaks in real time, leading to loss of fewer lives. Next. Our next argument or talking point has to do with data ownership and ethical independence. This is a question to all of you. What happens when our samples are shipped in another continent? Of course, the data is often stored there. It doesn't come back to the data don't come back, leaving us with no control over it. Now, this should create ethical legal concerns about ownership. Of course, it should create concern about consent, which can be used in pharmaceutical research without benefits sharing with the original source. Of course, Africa could be the original source of that data. Therefore, Africa must have control over its data. It enables Africa to achieve data sovereignty in genomics and economic growth. Next. Our next point. Well, we want to state again, capacity building and economic growth as a benefit for us maintaining our own infrastructure. Investing in genomic sequencing infrastructure helps to build local expertise, training bioinformaticians, molecular biologists, and of course, data analysts. Today, many of our scientists have not returned home due to lack of scientific infrastructure, because whenever they return, they don't have these different equipment to work with. These infrastructures strengthen universities, research institutes, and of course, national laboratories. Let's take, for example, South Africa and Nigeria are already seeing the benefits because of the structure they have developed. Relying on the international community will only reduce our potential and, of course, our capital. Next. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, global equity and scientific reputation is of concern. Africa contributes over 17 to 18% of the world's population. But guess what? Less than 2% of the global genomic data comes from African population. This is unfair. This imbalance leads to biased medical research and treatment that do not reflect Africa's genomic diversity. Next. Next. Now, as we've presented our points, our opponent team or our opposition have presented a few arguments that which we can rely on and of course give our points, our argument towards that. One of them has to do with high cost and limited skill. If we were to consider high cost, we can clearly state that it's true that economic infrastructure requires investment. That's logical. But cost should not be mistaken for impossibilities. Africa has already invested billions in other critical sectors like telecommunications and renewable energy, proving that strategic investment pays off. Now, relying on external labs might seem cheaper. Yes, that has been the case over years. But it perpetuates dependency and data exports, draining intellectual and financial capital from the continent. We as Affirmative Team are clear with the point by stating the real question is not whether it's costly, for of course everything will have to require cost, it's whether we can afford to keep sending our data and samples abroad. Again, our opposite said access to advanced expertise. Do we really expect our continent to have those experts if we don't have these facilities? Of course, no. While international collaboration provides expertise, they also create asymmetrical relationships. Building our own infrastructure means building our own expertise, not renting. Local infrastructure allows for hands-on training, mentorship, and generation of African genomic scientific or scientists who innovate solutions specific to Africans' health needs. Again, we come up to say, we do not reject collaboration. Of course, collaboration is very important. We reject one-sided dependence. Next. Next. Now, our next argument has economics of scale. Now, the economics of scale, capitalized global hubs may be efficient, but they are geographically and politically distinct from African realities. When an outbreak occurs, let's say Ebola, COVID-19, or Mpox, waiting for foreign labs to process samples, delay response, and of course, cost lives. Many people die in during that time. Economies of scale can also be achieved within Africa through regional genomic network like the African CDC's Parisian Genomic Initiatives. Again, we'll come up to say the true efficiency lies in speed, access, and sovereign cost. If we rely on cost continuously, there will not be something good coming out of what we want. Now, the next argument is quality assurance and standardization, according to our opposite team. Now, we come up to say, let it be known that quality is not exclusive to foreign labs. We can't just conclude that foreign labs will always provide quality materials. African centers like the Nikochi Institute of Ghana, the CARET in Kenya, and of course the NICD in South Africa are processing world-class genomic data. Is that not known? With proper training, fundings, and oversight, African facilities can meet or even exceed global standard. We need data ownership and not as well as privacy. Again, we come up to say, quality improves through investment and empowerment, not through outsourcing. Next. Finally, for rebuttal from our opposite team. Strategic collaboration over isolation. Again, we come up to say, developing local capacity is not isolationism, it's strategic independence. Now, true collaboration happens between equals and not dependence, as we may be depending at all points in time. A strong African genomic infrastructure enhances collaboration by contributing data, technology, and innovation from within the continent. Depending on external infrastructure will make us followers, not leaders, basically in the global genomic research. Finally, we come up to say to this point, building our own capacity strengthens, not weaken global collaborations. Next, for our conclusion. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for following. As we've come to the conclusion, we want to say developing Africa's own genomic sequencing infrastructure is not just a scientific goal. It is a matter of sovereignty, survival, and of course, self-defense. By investing in can better protect its people, empower its scientists, and contribute meaningfully to global science. Therefore, we, the Affirmative Team, proudly assert that African countries should develop their own genomic sequencing infrastructure rather than just rely on international facilities. By making investments in its own genomics infrastructure, Africa may go from being a data donor, as we always donate, to data leader, using its own discoveries to influence the direction of research worldwide. At this junction, I want to say thank you and goodbye.